Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Tyler Brinks. We're going to get started. This webinar is called Flipping and Pitching 101. Give you a little bit about myself and we'll jump right into it. Basically what I do is I fish for a living through all of my business, We Fish Media. I'm a writer, a tournament angler. I work with a lot of different companies and really fishing is my life. So, that's what I do. A lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about today is stuff that I've learned through 18 years of tournament fishing. And then a lot of it is also from all the articles that I've written with pros. So I've picked up a lot of tips along the way from them, as well as from my own experiences. A little bit more about myself. Like I said, I am a writer. I write for a lot of different websites and magazines. I'm a tournament angler. Like I said, I've been to the BFL All-American, BFL Angler of the Year a couple times, Washington State team. Those are some of the things that I've accomplished in my career. And I am based out of Spokane, Washington. And you might not think it's a flipping and pitching mecca, but it really is. There's tons of opportunities to do that where I live. And I also spent 5 years in Florida, so I have a lot of experience from there. Fishing with some of the best flipping and pitching guys there are in the flippers and pitchers in the world, really. So that's great. Okay, so we're gonna get started, and there are some opportunities to answer questions. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A section, so go ahead and send those to me. I'll stop periodically to answer questions, and then I'll also answer questions at the end, and also give you my contact information at the end, so you can send any follow-up questions that you might think of. This will be recorded as well, so it will be on the Navionics YouTube page. I'll share it on all my social media, and also on the Navionics website. All right, so we're going to get started with a quick poll, and then we'll get into it. So we're going to launch this poll real quick. That's good. And this will just kind of give me a better idea of how I should, things that I'm going to talk about. Okay, we're going to give a few more seconds. Nice. Okay. Good. It looks like one of the answers is running away, so that's perfect. Okay, I got a couple more people still to vote on the poll. Okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and end it here. We're waiting on one person, but they're probably not paying attention. But it looks like 50% said once in a while. That was by far the number one choice. So that's good. So I think it'll be good for all of us to hopefully learn a few things. We'll go ahead and share the results for you. See how that goes. There you go. Looks like a lot of you once in a while. So there's definitely opportunity to do more of it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump into the presentation, and I'll keep it moving. Again, if you have any questions, just shoot them off to the Q&A section. I'll stop periodically, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do the quick presentation. Okay, here we go. Get rid of this stuff so I can see it. Okay, so the agenda, we're going to go over the basics of it, the when and the where, which I think is really important, and also the rods, reel, and line, which I think is very important. You got to have the right equipment to do it properly, to be effective flipping and pitching. We're also going to talk about the baits, the things that I use, and it's really pretty simple. You're going to maybe be surprised. There's only a handful of things that I use for this technique. We'll also talk about the terminal tackle as well. Okay, so a couple differences, flipping versus pitching, there is a huge difference. It's kind of, they're all kind of grouped together. People say, oh, I was flipping a dock, but half the time they're really pitching it, probably most of the time. So there is a big difference in that. I'm going to show you a quick video of that. We're not going to do too many videos. I'm not going to be like a substitute teacher, make you watch videos the whole time. So it's just going to be 2 minutes with Denny Brower talking about how to do flipping and pitching, because there is a big difference. I'm also going to talk about punching and skipping, because I think that they go hand in hand. I'm going to talk about those a little bit as well on what I use and how I do it as well. Like I said, we're going to watch this quick video. And I'll also recommend a flipping video series. This is on the Seagar website. I would definitely recommend going to the Seagar website or the YouTube page. And their YouTube page is called Seagar Line and Leader. But there's a whole collection of videos from Denny Brower, who, you know, if you don't know, he's like the man for flipping and pitching. So I learned quite a bit from him, even though I do it a lot. You know, these videos were very well done. So definitely check those out. Like this one right here is just the equipment. There's all different topics that he talks about. Okay, so we're gonna go over this video real quick. Like I said, there is a difference between flipping and pitching. So we're gonna jump into that. Okay, let's see here.
And the technique, if you've never done it before, have the bait about even with the reel. And this is the pitching technique. And just grab the back of the bait and hang on to it. Don't let go of it. And as you raise the rod up, you let go of the bait. Just let it come out of your hand, just like that. And upward motion of the rod will propel the lure out there. Now, the faster you bring the rod up, the further you're going to be able to get it. So if you really wind up like that, you can get it a long way, and you can get it up underneath boat docks and willow trees and next to stumps, wherever you think that fish may be laying. The pitching technique I use a lot, especially in clear water, because I don't want to get too close to those fish and spook them. So I'm staying back and using this. And always about that distance of line, about even with the reel, is about the perfect amount of line to have. I'm left-handed, so it's in my left hand. You're right-handed. You're going to probably have your handles up like that as you make the presentation. Now, the flip itself, when you get real close, say matted grass, dirty water, get the handful of line, lure even with the reel, and just an underhand swing of the rod. And as you're swinging the bait forward, you're letting the line in this hand slide through your fingers, and you're getting the hand right back to the reel. You engage the reel, and now you got a piece of line that is ideal to work close to fish with. You need to learn to keep your boat a certain distance from the cover, or you're going to end up with too much line or not enough line. It's going to be real awkward. So once you figure out what your wingspan is, and you got that bait even with the reel again, then you got to keep your boat the same distance from the cover, so that when you make this little flip into the cover, you're not too close or too far away. Now you can let it sink. You're ready to set the hook. Both techniques together will allow you to get that lure in the places where the biggest bass in the lake live. Shallow water, heavy cover.
All right, so I thought that was a pretty good video explaining the differences between the two techniques, because there is a difference. And like I said, people group it together, but it's not the same at all. But, you know, the majority of what I do is pitching, you know, and he made some good points there. Flipping is a shallow water technique, so is pitching. But flipping is when you're a lot closer to the targets. So that's going to be typically when the water's dirty, just because you're so close. So, you know, super dirty water or very heavy cover, you know, with a very short distance from where you are to where the cover is. So that's when I would use flipping versus pitching. Okay, we're going to talk about a little bit where I do, you know, both these techniques, and then we'll see if there's any questions. And like I said, feel free to shoot them off anytime. You know, like I said, it's typically shallow water, you know, and it's a heavy cover technique, you know, grass and pads. Docks are one of my favorite places to pitch. Logs, laydowns, rocks, really anywhere there's an ambush point. You know, just think of somewhere where the fish are hiding. It could be even shade. It doesn't have to be a specific, you know, like, you know, an object. It could just be shade. You know, if flipping to shade is a good way to catch fish that are just hanging out there. So they're, you know, like I said, any targets where they're going to be hiding, ambushing, anywhere that you think that they would be, you know, it's a good place to pitch to it. Practice makes perfect. And, you know, they say this all the time, but with flipping and pitching, it is so important to practice with it. You know, I started flipping and pitching years ago. I would set pots and pans out in my backyard underneath trees to simulate what it's like to pitch into those trees. So that really helped me. And I still do that, you know, because the better you can get at it, the more close to this target, the harder to reach targets, you're going to catch way more fish. And, you know, if you could do it without making a big splash, you know, that's another huge thing as well. Okay, so we got a question here. Okay, that's a good question from Al. And it says, I am right-handed and just bought a few lefty reels to learn. so I don't have to switch hands on repeated casts. I noticed many pros pitch with right and retrieve right. What do you recommend? And early on when I started fishing, someone pointed this out to me, and I am right-handed, and they said you need to use left-handed reels for this because you're not going to have to switch hands after each pitch. One, it takes time, but a lot of times fish are going to hit it as soon as it hits the water. So I would recommend to use the opposite hand reel of what you are. So if you're a right-handed person, I would use a left-handed. If you're left-handed, I would use a right-handed. That's just my personal experience, but it makes sense for me because then you're actually pitching and flipping with the rod with your dominant hand, and then you don't have to switch hands. So I actually use lefty for all my stuff like this, and then I'll use righty reels for when I'm casting and retrieving things like a crankbait. So that's a good question, and it's something that is often overlooked, but I think it's totally makes sense to use a different hand reel so you don't miss fish. So that's a good question. Thanks, Al. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go back to the next thing. So where to flip and pitch? There's a lot of places, like I said. It's easy to find the majority of these because it's visual. You could be driving down the lake and seeing something that looks good. You can see a tree coming out of the water. It's really pretty easy to visually find things, but to find those hidden areas, you can use Navionics, which I'll talk about real quick, the app from Navionics, and also Google Earth. Those are 3 ways to find spots. Maybe it's a place that you haven't fished before or anything else. That's a good way to find areas to fish. So you can see this is a map, and you can see it actually says where emergent vegetation is, which is really helpful. So you can, it also says shallow here. There's a lot of targets. If you're not familiar with this area, this can give you a starting point to find areas. Same thing with the mobile app. I definitely recommend getting this. It is awesome. I use it all the time. It's the same principle, but you can do it on your phone, on the go. Anytime I'm sitting in a waiting room or anything else, I'm researching spots. That's what I'm doing. So that's a good way to find these spots. I also recommend learning about the depth ranges. It's a really easy setting to do from the app, but you can change the different colors. Say you're only looking for 5 foot or less, which generally I would say is true of flipping and pitching. You can change that so that only those colors show up, so that one looks different than every other color. So that's a good way to do it. Google Earth is another awesome way to find backwaters, which, in the spring, a lot of these backwaters are going to be where flipping and pitching is ideal. So for instance, you could see this backwater. It looks like it's accessible there. It's always hit or miss if you can actually get into it based on the water level, but I recommend using this tool here, which actually allows you to, you can see that it looks like a little clock, and this allows you to adjust the setting from Google Earth to look at it from different months. Maybe looking in the spring, there's gonna be a lot more water here. If you scroll it to a picture that was taken in the fall, it might be a lot lower. So this is something I always do because it can vary so much on what you're seeing and what you can actually get into. So that little clock tool, I don't know actually what it's called, but that's very helpful for Google Earth to find some of these backwaters that might be places to check out for flipping and pitching. Okay, we're gonna kind of get into the equipment now, and like I said, if you guys have any more questions, just send them over. With rods, there's a lot of specific rods for flipping and pitching. A flipping rod, something that's heavy, that's what you always picture, a longer rod, and there is a reason for that. I recommend at least a 7-foot rod or more. That's going to give you better leverage for setting hook at a short distance, and then more importantly, getting them out of cover. That's something that we'll talk about a little bit, but all those different areas that I talked about that are good for flipping and pitching, you need to be able to get those fish out of that cover quickly, or they're going to wrap you around those logs, they're going to dig you into the grass, and you're going to lose a lot of those fish. So having a longer rod is definitely helpful. And I said 7 foot or more because it does vary based on how tall you are. If you're a little bit shorter, a 7 foot would be okay. But if you're 6'5", you're going to need a bigger rod, just proportionally. I would say definitely a heavy at the minimum, or an extra heavy. And then I also like a extra fast action with a good tip, because I want to be able to get those good hook sets as well. I just prefer that versus just holding a broomstick. I want to be able to to feel a little bit of those bites. So that's what I would recommend for that. This is the one I find myself using the most, and this one is a 7.7. It says medium heavy, but this is a mag medium heavy. I mean, this is a stiff, stout rod, and it's an extra fast action. One thing I always take a look at is the line weight rating. You know, usually a 12 to 25 is going to be in the range that you're needing, and then also taking a look at the lure rating. You know, if yours can only go up to an ounce, it's probably not heavy enough. So this one is rated for from a 1/4 ounce all the way to 1.5 ounce. So this is a pretty good all-around rod for both flipping and pitching, and even some punching. This one's actually made by Powell, but there's a lot of good rods on the market. So don't be stuck with just one brand. There's tons of them that are good rods. Pay more attention to the action and the rating and things like that. Okay, moving on to reels. You know, we talked about the left-handed versus right-handed, and I thought that was a good point. The other 3 important factors I find is having a fast gear ratio. I'd say a 7 to 1 or faster. And the reason for me is I like to be able to pitch it in there and then retrieve it back really quickly. So it's something that you're doing constantly over and over. So if you have a slower reel, you're going to get less casts in a day. Same thing if you hook into a big fish, you want to be able to start moving them quickly. You know, I know the lower gear ratios are going to be a little more powerful generally, but having that faster reel is going to be really a good thing for you. The other very important thing is having a good drag. You know, they're all rated based on you know, the pound ratings for how much drag they have. So get the best that you can get, the highest drag rating. Same with the quality of reel. I basically just said get the best you can afford, but at the same time, I don't think it's crucial to have, you know, the most expensive reel for this technique, because you're not going to be making long casts. It's such a short distance technique, both of them, that it's not as important. So get the best you can afford. But I personally would use, if I had a really nice reel, I would use that for something where you cast a lot more versus the flipping and pitching. Okay, good question. And we'll talk about this now. Like I said, anyone just feel free to shoot them off. How do I handle the fish? Horse it out as fast as I can, and I would say yes, definitely. You know, as soon as you hook that fish, horse them out at least away from the cover right away. I think that is so important, or you're gonna end up losing some fish. So good question there, Damon. Okay, this is the reel I use quite a bit for flipping and pitching, and this is a Revo Premier. It is a good quality reel, but I just like how it feels as well. So that's another thing with flipping and pitching. It's something that has to be comfortable for you. So, you know, put that into your thinking as well. It doesn't have to only be, you know, based on the gear ratio and all that stuff. You know, whatever you think. This is a good question here, and so I'm laughing. Are any of the gizmos on the reels worth it? If not, let me get that. I can't read the whole thing. Okay, like the special buttons and whatnot on standard bait casters. And I have used reels that have like the flipping bar, the flipping and pitching bar, like the old Shimano Castaic, and I did not like it. I never used it. And if you're not familiar with it, it is a good thought process. It just didn't work for me. It's basically a bar that you push down, and it just, as you release it, it stops it. So you can make a lot quicker pitch supposedly, but you know, I never really used it, honestly. I just used my thumb and the standard bait cast reel. So I would say for me, it wasn't worth it. I think I actually got rid of that reel, so I definitely never use it. Good question though, Brent. Okay, line. This is another huge thing. And braid and fluorocarbon, I've found myself lately flipping and pitching a lot more with fluorocarbon. I used to only be braid, but I like the fact that it has, okay, let me back up real quick. Why not use the Revo winch, which has more drag? And simple question, and I just don't have one of those. So I mean, that's really the answer to that one. But if it has more drag, it would, you know, be a better reel for this technique. The other question is, do you adjust your drag tighter than normal with flipping and pitching? This is another good question, and I do. You know, I basically tighten it all the way down with just, I usually pull it out a little bit. So if I hook into a giant, it's going to have a little bit give, but definitely a lot tighter than normal. you know, especially when I'm using lighter line or if I'm using treble hook lures, I have it a lot looser. So yeah, definitely a lot more tighter than normal. So good question. Okay, I'm gonna jump back into this with the line. I'm gonna start over here because I kind of lost my train of thought there. So braid and fluorocarbon, yeah, that's what I was saying. I use fluorocarbon a lot more because I do feel that you get more bites with fluorocarbon because it is obviously going to be a lot more invisible than a braided line. So I have switched to the heavier fluorocarbon to allow me to still get the benefits of having a heavy line, but also the benefits of fluorocarbon, which is a lot more clear underwater. So as far as when and where, anytime it's very dirty or it's very, very thick cover like mats and a lot of grass, I'm gonna still use braid. But if it's not as dirty, I'm gonna use fluorocarbon. Another question I get all the time is knots. And for me, I always use the Palomar with fluorocarbon. I know a lot of people don't have very good luck with it for some reason, but I've never had a fish break on fluorocarbon with a Palomar. It just takes a little bit more time, and you're going to have to, you just don't want the line to wrap over itself, so you just have to be a little bit more careful as you tighten it together. The snell knot is something that I always use for braided line with flipping and pitching, and I would definitely recommend doing that. You can Google that and get a lot of good how-to videos on YouTube on how to tie the snell knot, but it is a good knot to tie with braid, and all the pros say it gets you a lot better hook set. It's just the way it's designed. It allows the hook to pop up and get into the roof of the mouth a lot easier when you're using this heavy cover. Okay. The next thing is, you know, as far as the size, and I saw a couple more questions come through, so I'll get to those as well. So for fluorocarbon, 15 to 30 pound is what I'm going to use. 15 would be on the very light side. You know, that's when I'm going to be more pitching to docks and things like that, where there's not a lot of chances of breaking off fish. So I would say that's when I would use the 15. I find myself using 20 probably the most. 30 once in a while, but I'd say 20 is probably what I use the most, and then 50 or 65 for braid. Okay, here we go. Good question. Why not use braid with fluorocarbon leader? And that's a great way to get the best of both worlds. You know, some people like that. I like it a lot for spinning. Actually, that's all I use on spinning is braid to fluorocarbon. But for me, I don't like it as much with the heavy line. I feel like the knot that joins the two is too big. So if that comes through the guides or anything like that, it makes a lot of noise and it has a potential to get damaged. So I would say definitely that's the reason why, is just because of the knot size. Okay, another good question from Damon. So I've only tried to flip and pitch a few times because I always get a rat's nest. How do I set up my reel properly for each technique? And this is awesome, and I think it's a good way to describe it is basically as you set your rod over the side of the water or over the boat or anything like that and push the button, it should fall down all the way down, hit the water or hit the side of your boat and not have a backlash. So I think that that's a good rule of thumb. As you get better, you can loosen it a lot more, but if you have it where you set it down and it falls down and doesn't overrun and doesn't get a backlash, I think you're good to go on that aspect. So that's probably how I would set it up at first. As you get better, you can loosen it up and you'll get longer and longer pitches as you get used to the technique. Okay, good question from Steve. And this has to do with line, you know, 15 to 30 fluorocarbon. Why not 15 to 30 braid? Why 50 or 65? I find that 15 to 30 pound braid is too thin for bait casting. So based on and it really doesn't have to do with the pound test, it's more the diameter, and the 50 to 65 pound braid is going to be more in line with that 15 and 20 pound fluorocarbon diameter. So it's going to be the same diameter, and if it's going to be the same diameter, I personally think why not have more pound tests? You know, I think the diameter is just a little bit more important for getting the right length in your cast and things like that. So good question there, Steve. Okay. Good questions, guys. Okay, this is a line that I just started using, and we got a question about weights, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. So this is the new Cigar flipping line. There's a braid and a fluorocarbon. I've been using this quite a bit. This is a 30, which I haven't used as much, but like I said, they do make it, or I do use 20 the most, and they have a 20, a 25, and a 30 in the fluorocarbon. And this fluorocarbon was designed specifically for flipping and pitching. So the two things it's going to have, it's going to be a lot more abrasion resistant, and it's also going to have more impact strength, because when you're flipping and pitching, you're a lot closer to targets, a lot closer to the fish. So when you set the hook, there's a possibility that some line can break. So this has a lot better impact strength, is how they describe it. Now they also have a braided line that's designed just for flipping with the help of Denny Brower. And it is, if you remember back when I was showing a picture of my reel, it's all black. I'll go ahead and jump back there, but because a lot of guys, they get braid, and after a while it starts to fade and it becomes kind of a whitish color, so they always marker it with black. But if you can do that at the beginning, it's a lot better, because black is a lot more invisible underwater than a white is, especially when it looks like a rope. So that they took input from a lot of anglers to make it all black, and it does hold its color very well. That's a question I get all the time. And when it does start to fade, it's kind of more like a gray color, and then as it gets wet, it kind of retains that black color again. So I've been really happy with it, and it comes black. You don't have to use a marker to make it black or anything. Okay, this is another question I get all the time. When should I flip soft plastics? When should I pitch jigs? There's a lot of personal preference in there, but here's a few of my general rules of thumb. If it's wood and rocks or it's cold water, I'm going to go with the jig more often than not. If it's warmer months and grass or around grass, which kind of go hand in hand, I'm going to use a soft plastic a lot more. So I think that's a good question. And that just came through. Have you tried any of the new braid that say 30-pound test with 10-pound diameter? Yeah, I have, Rusty, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the diameter. I would use that on spinning, but it's just for bait casting gear, which is almost exclusively these techniques. I would say it's too thin, personally. Okay. So like I was going back to the baits real quick, and again, keep those questions coming in, guys. Color doesn't matter as much as you think. I am very simple with colors. There's so many colors on the market. The bait companies have to, make money, so they have every color to, catch fish from and not fish. You've probably heard that saying before. And because really most of the time when you're doing this, it is strictly a reaction bite. When you pitch it in there, that's when they're going to hit it right away. They're sitting there in a log or on the side of a dock. You pitch it in there into their zone, and they're going to hit it right away. So I don't think it matters at all half the time, most of the time. I mean, it could be pink or whatever. I mean, it's just a reaction bite. Okay. So, this is a picture of when I lived in Florida, and this is something I caught on a sweet beaver, this bass, and you could see all the reeds and everything around there. This is perfect prime time for both flipping and pitching. Pitching, I would be doing it from a lot farther away, like we talked about earlier, where flipping is up close and personal in this really thick stuff. Okay, then this is fast forward to the Northwest. These fish were caught on jigs pitching wood. So I just put these pictures in here to show that these techniques work 3,000 miles apart, everywhere in between. So it's just something that always works, is flipping and pitching to shallow cover. And it's, as you can see, they're good fish. Typically with these techniques, you're going to catch bigger fish than, finesse techniques, in my experience, and, experience of a lot of people. Okay, so soft plastics, like I said, I'm simple. I mean, these are my two favorite things to flip and pitch, and I use them all the time. The sweet beaver and any of the dark colors. This is a hematoma. I could see I have one in there with a blue pincher. I think that's some other bait. It has a claw on it, but again, it's something that's just something that's dark, that's compact. Those are great baits to use. Same with the Havoc Pit Boss. I like this one more when it's warmer water, because it has more flapping tentacles, so it gets a little bit more action. As it's a little bit colder, I like a more subtle type bait. This is a picture of my jig box, and I have other jig boxes, but this is the one that always never leaves my boat. And as you can see, it's very simple. These are all black. These are black and blue, and these are just green pumpkin and watermelons, and then, you know, all my trailers. So as you can see, you don't have to have every single color. These work for every water clarity, every lake I go to. You know, these jigs I always have with me. Okay, good question. Ever tried the biffle bug? Is it too big? I actually like the biffle bug, and I kind of group it in with the same as the beaver. You know, they're all kind of similar. Um, it's just up to personal preference. And I've just had a lot of good luck with the sweet beaver, but I have used the biffle bug. It works great, and it does have kind of properties of both of these, I would say. So that's a good one to try. Okay, I got one more question. I'll do this before I go too far, but it's, you know, what about, and this it has to do with reels. You know, what about the newer reels like the Corrado 70 with, hold on, too many questions coming through. I'm missing them. It basically said the Corrado is designed for thinner diameter line, and it is that the 70 Corrado, which is what the question was about. It's a smaller profile reel, and I would probably not use it for this technique. I would use that. That's a great reel. I just saw it. It just got released at the Classic, and I would use that more for jerk baits because it can handle those lighter diameter lines. I think it would be better suited for some of those techniques, light line techniques. Okay, good question. With the beavers, are you rigging these Texas style or punch style? I kind of do a mix of both. It's definitely Texas rigged. And I do punch them as well, but I still Texas rig the hook, and then I tuck the hook back into it. It's called Tex posed, and sometimes I'll actually tuck it into the side because there's a little bit more ribs on it. So I think that it's a better way to hide your hook in the side of this. So I actually kind of rig it a little crooked. I just find that this center part, and if you can see my mouse there, it's really kind of thin there. So I try to have the hook going into these ribs over here. I think it's just better to get less things hung up on it. Eric says, living rubber on your jigs. It's just standard silicone. I do like living rubber for a casting jig in cold water, but typically I'm just gonna use a standard skirt. Another good question from Kent. Rattles. I'm kind of on the fence on that. I don't think it's gonna hurt. I don't think it's gonna help. You know, some jigs come with it. So yeah, if it comes with it, I don't think it's gonna hurt at all. Okay. Steve says, who makes your favorite jig? This jig that I showed you, most of those were Eco Pro Tungsten Pro heavyweight jigs. And I like those because they are made of tungsten. So they're gonna be a little bit smaller profile for the size of them. So that's a good one, you know, but there's a lot of good jigs on the market. Hooks we'll talk about here in just a minute. Okay. Oh yeah, keep those questions coming. Good job, guys. Okay, I'm gonna show you one other thing I do with, oh, actually we're gonna jump into the jigs. I showed you my jigs. This is my favorite jig of all. This is the Eco Pro Tungsten jig, and I love this jig. This is a Zoom Super Chunk Junior trailer. As you can see, it's all black. You know, I use some other colors as well, but this one always works for me in all water clarity. And as you can see, my jig has been modified, and I'll show you what I do to it. You can see there's a few pieces of the weed guard missing here, and then it's a shorter weed guard than normal, and it's cut at an angle. And I'll show you how I do that, but that is something that I really believe in. So like I said, I cut the angle, I cut it at an angle, and then I cut some of those strands. Because a lot of times they're too stiff, so I want to have a little bit of flex. So the best solution for me is to cut maybe, you know, 3 or 4 of those actual strands. And I also cut it at an angle and cut some of it off just because it's gonna, I feel, have a better hook set because it's nothing to get in the way of it. And I just find that it works out a lot better. So that's something I always do with all my jigs. It's really easy to do. I just think that you get better hook sets, and it's just a great way to catch more fish that bite. Okay, this kind of goes in related to the question that Steve asked about hooks. So we'll get into that. So when it comes to weights, I believe tungsten really is the way to go. Like I said, with the jig, the smaller profile is very helpful to have that smaller profile instead of having a big clunky lead thing that could get in the way. I like big hooks with the keepers on there for the plastics, and I'll show you a couple of those. And I'm not partial to any one brand. There's a lot of them that I use. Another question that people are always asking is if you peg your sinker or not. And I typically do. And the reason that I do is as you're pitching it in there, it's less likely for the weight to get hung up on, say, one side of a log and your bait to fall on the other side. There's nothing more frustrating than that. You cast on over a limb, your weight sinks down over here and your bait's sitting up here on the other side of the log or the limb or whatever. So I like to peg my weights, and I'll show you what I use to do that. Also punch skirts as well. That's a way to kind of get a soft plastic with a jig appearance, and I'll show you what those look like if you're not familiar with them. But it's kind of the best of both worlds, where you can still Texas rig a soft plastic, but having a skirt above it as well without using a jig. Okay, so like I said, tungsten weights are very important. This is a little quick glimpse at some of my flipping and pitching weights. These are the more standard worm weights style that you may be familiar with, and then these are the flipping style. As you can see, they're a lot fatter and more compact. That's going to allow you to have a shorter weight versus a longer weight. So your whole profile is going to be a lot smaller if you go with these flipping style weights. You could see there's a lot of chrome color in here, or just the unpainted. And this is something I picked up from talking to some pros. A lot of them prefer this color. I was responsible for taking some of the orders from pro staff from EcoPro Tungsten, and all the pros, it seemed like, were ordering unpainted. And the reason is it adds a little bit of flash. So especially if you're punching into heavy cover, it's almost like a spinnerbait blade as well. So some of those guys think that you get more of a reaction when you have a little bit of flash. It kind of goes against what you may be thinking, but they use it all the time, and I haven't noticed a decrease in bites. So I tried it, and it works just as fine. So it's just kind of up to your personal preference. If you want to try something different, either buy the unpainted or get one that's starting to chip a little bit and just scrape it off to see if it makes a difference. Okay, question, we'll stop here real quick. How do you know when to modify your skirt? How much is appropriate? And what is the difference between the old style skirt and the modern skirts? The second part of it, the modern skirts are all very good silicone, so they're not going to stick together as much. I think of the old style as like the flat rubber, things like that kind of groups together a little bit more. So I think the modern skirts have more action and are better in all situations, but those old style skirts, they work fine too. Now, how do you know when to modify your skirt and how much is appropriate? I do trim my jig skirt as well. Usually I'll hold the jig up like this and then cut it right below the hook. That's probably what I use the most. It just seems to work for me. Some guys trim it really short so it kind of poofs out when it hits the water. That's another way to do it as well. But for me, I usually just trim it right below the jig, so right below the hook. So that's about as much as I do on that. Okay, these are a couple different weights. I just want to give you a quick view of this. These are the EcoPro and then the Strike King. I like EcoPro because they're insert free, and then also you get 2 per pack versus 1 per pack, and these are the actual retail prices. So definitely check them out. I do like them. The Strike King makes a good weight as well, but I do find that the EcoPro has been awesome. That's all I've used for 5 years. Okay, here's a question about hooks. These are hooks that I pulled out of my hook box, and as you can see, there's different ones. This is one of my favorites, the Gamakatsu heavy wire, because it has or heavy cover worm. It has a nice keeper on it that's actually a wire keeper, and that keeper is going to keep your soft plastic in place. The Hack Attack Strike King hooks are good too. This is more of a rubber type material. It's like a collar, and that will keep your bait from sliding down as well. And then this one's a trocar style, and I like that one as well. So really any of these straight shank style are fine. You're going to get a better hook set, I believe. You're not going to bend them out because look how stout these things are. So I just think you get a better hook up, and I like these a lot for flipping and pitching. And if I am flipping or pitching a smaller bait, sometimes I'll go to an extra wide gap, but typically I'll just go to a smaller size in this style. Okay. Okay, good question about weights. And it said, I've read articles that said if you don't use inserts, it will cut your line. Is there any truth to that? I have found that inserts may be just as bad as not having an insert. It really depends on the brand and how smooth the inside of it. I said Eco Pro Tungsten is what I use. The inside of it's very smooth, so you're not going to fray anything from that. Some of the inserts that other companies put in, are great, but then there's some that actually have an edge and that will actually cut your line. So, there's a lot of different, it really just depends on the quality of the tungsten weight that you're getting. A lot of the really cheap companies, they're cheap for a reason. So definitely, look into what the most popular ones are. Talk to some people that use them a lot. I haven't had any problems with Eco Pro. So I can't say that insert free has any damage just because I haven't used too many other brands. Okay, next question. You have an impression on the slither rigs? And if you're not familiar with the slither rig, it's kind of a prepackaged punch rig. It has it's kind of all together. It has the weight, the plastic, everything else all together on it. So I haven't used them too much, but I think they'd be good for this technique actually. Okay, here we go. Pegging your weights. These are some pegs from Eco Pro. There's a black one and then also a clear one as well. I always, like I said, I use these all the time. These are really simple. You just slide your line through it and then pull it up over it to peg those weights. These fit perfectly into the tops of weights. You can also get bobber stops. Those work as well. Really anything to keep it pegged from sliding up and down. Okay, I got a couple more questions here. I'll get these so I don't, because they're kind of related to this. So Joseph asks, on the hooks, it appears there's not enough room to snell the knot. There definitely is. It is pretty tight, but there's plenty of room on there. And like I said, if you guys aren't familiar with the snell knot, check it out for braid especially. There's a lot of great videos on YouTube. Okay, Des says, when you set the hook, do you reel down on the fish first before setting the hook compared to big hook sets after the bite occurs? Yes, if there's any slack, I will reel down to it, but typically I'm anticipating that strike, so I'm trying to explain how I do this right. I reel down if there's any slack to it, but typically as I'm pitching, I'm expecting a bite, so I'm keeping the line tight the whole time so I can set the hook right away. So if you have slack, reel down to them definitely, because when you make that big hook set, if you have slack, you're not going to get as good of a hook set. So it just kind of depends on your technique as well. Hope that answers your question there, Des. Okay, Greg, with your weights, what sizes are you using? 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce, etc. I would say the most of the time I'm using about a 3/4 ounce. If it's a lot lighter cover, I'm going to use lighter weight. I mean, really, you're going to use the lightest you can get away with. If you have to actually physically punch into it, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute, you're going to need that 1 ounce to 2 ounce even to get through the cover. But I personally like the lightest weight I can get away with. So it could be even down to 3/8 as well. They make those flipping style weights, those shorter, fatter ones in 3/8. So you can definitely use those as well. So lightest you can get away with. But I find that 3/4 ounce works to get through most cover and into the thick of trees and things like that. Okay, punching. Like I said, this is a picture I took on Lake Okeechobee. This is a punching paradise. there's so much stuff to punch here, so many spots. So going back to that question Greg asked, a 3/8 ounce wouldn't do nothing here. You're going to need a ounce, 1.25 ounce, 1.5 ounce, 2 ounce. I even heard of guys putting two 2-ounce weights together and casting it way up just to punch through some of this stuff. But there's not a lot of that in all over the country, but Florida has tons of it. But it doesn't have to be just grass. Anytime that there's blown up cover, maybe a bunch of pine needles blew off the tree and all got matted into a corner in a little pocket. That's something you could punch. Or it could be trash. It could be anything. There's so many things besides only vegetation that you could punch. So there is an opportunity to punch more than just Okeechobee. So again, you're just going to use a heavier weight to get through that cover, and it is just like flipping and pitching. It's a reaction bite where as soon as it gets in there, that's where they're gonna hit it for the most part. Sometimes you have to yo-yo it up and down, but the majority of the time they're sitting there, bait comes flying in, and they hit it. Another good question, and it kind of relates to what I was just talking about. So, is the fall rate important? Does the weight make the bait fall too fast or too slow? Does the right fall mean more reaction bites? Yeah, absolutely. So that's why you do kind of have to experiment with weight sizes, because there is something to be said about having a heavy weight and just crashing it through there and getting that reaction bite, like you said. But at the same time, it may scare them as well. So it just kind of depends on the type of cover, how the fish are reacting. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I can't say that there's a one answer for all those, but the perfect fall rate can mean the difference between getting bit or not. If it falls slowly in there, it may be perfect, but you might want that crashing in there as well. And Damon says, how soon do you try a weight before deciding to change it up and try another size? If I get on a really good flipping and pitching bite, I'm going to have a couple different weights rigged up. Maybe the same exact bait, but maybe I'll have a half, or a 3/8, a 3/4, and an ounce or something like that. So I can kind of experiment with that. So it just, again, depends on the type of cover, but you will save yourself some time if you have a couple rods rigged up with different weights. You'll just be able to switch a lot quicker versus sitting down, cutting it, retying, digging through your weight box, all that stuff. So if you do get on a good bite, have a couple different rods rigged up. Okay, like I was saying, bigger weights, bigger cover. This is just strictly to get it through that cover, with punching. And I would say the heaviest you can go for both rods and line, because, thinking back to that picture, if you get a fish in there, just because you hook them doesn't mean you're going to get them out. I mean, even the best pros in the world, they lose tons of fish punching because it's so hard to get them out. So that's why you want that heavier rod to horse them out quickly. And I found, with kind of a side note, but when fish get wrapped up in grass and their eyes are all covered with grass, it's really easy to just pull them in. You just have to horse them in, because if their eyes are covered, they just kind of stop fighting. It's really weird, but I pulled in fish that have piles of grass around them, and it's just like pulling in piles of grass, and you dig through it, and there's a 5-pounder in there, because they're excuse me, because they're not really fighting because they can't see. So having that heavy rod allows you to quickly get them out of the water, out of that grass, and just pull all that grass and everything in there together. Okay, good question. How many rods would you say you have rigged up for flipping and pitching on a given day? If I'm strictly doing it, I'm going to have probably 4 of them, maybe a jig, a soft plastic, and then a bigger jig and a bigger weight soft plastic. So it just kind of depends, but I would say always at least 2, just to be safe. Always, I have one rod that always has that black jig on it, no matter where I go, any time of year. And then I'll typically have one rigged up with a soft plastic and a flipping weight. Okay, for multiple weights on multiple rods, do you use a different power action, or is that not important? It's still always use a heavy. Even going down to the lightest, 3/8 with 15-pound, which again is like my minimum on both sides, I would still use a heavy action rod. So if you can have rods that can handle all those different things, from the 3/8 all the way to 1.5 ounces, you wouldn't really have to switch rods. But I would say typically it would be a little bit lighter. It just might not have as big of a range as some of those extra heavy rods. So I would say that you could use the same rod for all of them, but maybe a little bit lighter, but still a heavy action rod, or maybe a little shorter or something like that. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, and this is punch skirts, if you're not familiar with them. And I know we had that question about slither rigs, and this is they're kind of built in with one of these. But these punch skirts are really cool. These are actually made by Paycheck Baits. They're actually, I think they're the first ones that came out with them. And then there's tons of companies that have these now, including Eco Pro Tungsten. But you just slide your line. First you put your peg, then your weight, then you slide your line through these, then you have your hook, and then your soft plastic. So this is kind of a way to get the appearance of a jig, but still the soft plastic as well. So, and there's tons of different colors as well. This is another option. This is from Eco Pro as well. This is a weight with a built-in kind of collar on it, so you can just slide a standard skirt, like a spinnerbait skirt or jig skirt. You can just slide this around here, and then just punch, peg your weight and have your hook. So that's a great option. and it's nice and condensed as well, so it's going to slide through cover very well. Okay, like I said, we're going to talk about excuse me, about skipping a little bit. And this is kind of similar. You know, it's something that I use in some of the same places. You know, this is a picture, I believe this is Mark Daniels Jr., yeah, in the FLW Pro. You can see he's quite a ways away from docks if he's skipping them. And this is something that I've found is very helpful. You know, it may seem kind of hard at first because you're so far away, but you're going to have a lot more room to swing your rod and get under those tight spots. So keeping the boat a little bit further away is going to help with skipping. Now, with skipping, I found that it's easier with spinning, but in my opinion, it's better with bait casting. And this is definitely takes a lot of practice to skip with bait casting gear. But by doing that, you're gonna have a heavier rod, typically heavier line. You can use a lot bigger baits because of the heavier bait cast rods. But definitely, it's a lot easier with spinning. When I'm using spinning, it's going to be finesse baits like a shaky head with a Senko, or even a small Senko on a shaky head, and wacky rigs. And then if it's bait casting gear, I'm going to be skipping things like jigs and swim baits even. But really, you can skip anything. And it's a lot like flipping and pitching because you're going to be around targets. You're going to be around generally heavier cover. And it's also going to be a reaction bite. You know, typically, as soon as you get it in there, those fish are going to bite it right away because they're just not used to seeing a bait. You know, they're hiding way under a dock or way under a set of logs or overhangs. So they're not going to be used to seeing something. So as soon as it hits the water, they're going to hit it typically. So skipping is definitely something I would practice doing because you can catch some really big fish doing it. Okay, got another question here. This has to do with rods, and it's micro guide versus regular for these techniques. And I personally, I really don't like micro guides too much, so I would say regular. You know, a lot of the rods nowadays are coming out with, they're not necessarily micro, but they're not really regular. They call them like mini guides, things like that. So I think those are kind of a happy medium because those micro guides, you know, with heavier line, cold water, cold weather, there's a lot of issues that can come up by using a micro guide. So I like the regular guides for that. Okay, another good question from Brent. Straight braid on spinning gear or for skipping docks or still with a leader? I would still use a leader. And it kind of contradicts what I was just saying, how it's a reaction bite, but I still think that if it's not a reaction bite, having that fluorocarbon leader is going to be helpful. So I would definitely upsize from what maybe I would use for like a drop shot rig. So instead of, you know, 15 or 20 pound braid, I'd be using like a 20 or 30 pound braid on my spinning. And instead of a leader of 6 or 8, it's gonna be like a 10 or 12 pound leader just because it is heavier cover. But I definitely like the braid to fluorocarbon on spinning just because more than anything else, you're going to be able to have less twist of your line. So I would say, if nothing else, that should be the reason that you'd want to do it, because straight fluorocarbon on spinning, you know, it can cause problems with line twist. Okay, good. Yeah. Say you skip in there and an 8-pound bass wraps around the dock leg. How do you handle this? Oh man, that'd be sad. But you know, basically like anything else, I mean, you're gonna either try to keep it pinned and try to get to it if you can with the boat. If not, just hope for the best and pull on it. I mean, it's, you know, people always, I fish with people and they see me make like a, you know, crazy cast or over all these things, and they're like, oh, how are you going to get it out? I'm like, well, if I didn't cast there, I wouldn't even have a chance of catching it. Maybe now I have a 50-50 chance. So I'll take that chance versus not even trying to go for it. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I mean, the best thing is to try to get to it without, with the boat, if it's pinned in there, if it's wrapped around there. But also a lot of times fish will swim around and they'll unhang themselves. I've seen that happen as well. So it's kind of tricky. It just depends on how it's wrapped up. Okay, so any other questions, shoot them off. We're wrapping up here. Got a couple more minutes. And if you guys have any more questions, send them off. I'm going to tell you about a few more things real quick. So with skipping, I guess this is the last one, but, you know, docks are prime time. That's the best for me. You know, overhanging bushes, objects, and again, practice, practice, practice. Okay, upcoming webinars. I have 4 more. The next one is on drop shot fishing, so it's kind of a complete opposite of this, but it's something I do a lot of. So there's going to be a lot of tips in there. I did one last year. You know, it's kind of like the intro, but this is the advanced drop shot fishing. So I'm going to give away some more secrets and talk about that one. So that one's next month, April 12th. You guys can read it right there. Then swim baits for smallmouth. I'm excited about that one. Hopefully I can get into some swim bait, smallmouth before then. Then we're going to do one on post-spawn bass fishing. And then the last one in July is on summer bass fishing in my region in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, if you have any follow-up questions, like I said, this will be recorded, so you can check it out later. But these are all of my ways to get a hold of me. I'll respond to your questions. Brinks at Navionics. You can see all that there. And then any other questions? Okay. Like I said, go ahead and send them off to me afterwards. That's fine. Okay, here we go. Oh, that's a good question. I kind of went over this and indirectly, but it's once the bait hits the ground, do you walk it back or pull it out and flip again? Like I was saying earlier, you know, it's typically a reaction bite. Typically, it's right when it hits or right after it hits the ground. So I would say I do not walk it all the way back. I may pitch it in there, let it fall, shake it a couple times, reel it in, and go to the next one. Rod and reel setup for spinning. I would like a shorter rod for skipping. I would say like a 6.6 and reel like a 2500 size reel. That's a good all around size. You know, either a Shimano. Abu Garcia makes a good one too, and they either have a 20 or a 30 size. Either of those would be good. Okay, I'm gonna get out of here because we have another webinar right after this for another guy. So thank you all for attending, and we'll be talking to you soon. If you have any questions, just let me know.